Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast, Grief and Life as We Know It.
Hello, hello. First of all, I want to say how brave you are for sharing your story. I know this is deeply personal and opening up like this must be incredibly hard. But it also is so meaningful, hearing your side, truly understanding your thoughts and feelings. But there are a few things I would love to dive deeper into. For example, how did all of this affect you while this was happening with your husband? Because you definitely went through some significant changes, not just emotionally, but physically as well.
Well, thank you for being here with me, sister.
Of course.
Honestly, talking about this still feels like therapy. Just saying it out loud actually helps, but at the same time, this is also a bit scary, to open up not just to you, but potentially also a large group of people. And that feels a little unreal still. But yeah, it's taken me a long time to get to where I am today. These experiences has definitely changed me in so many ways.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. To share this must be so hard since it's so personal to you and also so painful. But I believe, therefore, also so important for you to actually share it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because there is always something to learn, I think, and hearing other people's stories going through the same has helped me so much during these years.
Yeah, I can imagine that's helpful. Not feeling so alone in your journey, maybe?
Definitely. I remember after my husband passed, I searched for different podcasts, books, documentaries, TV shows, and so on, just to find something or someone I could relate to.
Yeah, and then it's nice if our podcast can give that to some searching for the same as you did.
Yeah, that's true. And hopefully we can give some kind of perspective and comfort and contribute to more openness to grief and also normalize all these different ways of grieving.
Yeah, let's hope so. Because it is still a bit taboo in a way to talk about this.
Yeah.
Reactions and behaviors after going through trauma or being in trauma or in the middle of grief, maybe. How you react to
Yeah,
things.
it definitely is. And I also think we live in a time where everything is supposed to be so perfect in a way, and grieving is kind of too much, maybe, too messy and uncomfortable. It's easier to just ignore it if you don't have to relate to it. And then when you at some point have to dive into it, you might be too overwhelmed, I guess, but I don't know.
Yeah, just the fact that we all have to face loss and grief at some point in different ways make this more important, I think.
Yeah, very important.
So let's dive into this. Because I remember that while my brother-in-law was sick, you naturally took on this protector role. You made sure that those around him didn't just talk about cancer all the time. And I remember in particular you telling me not to mention it too much when we spoke on the phone, and it was so hard. Like, how can you just ignore something so huge? It felt so unnatural, like we were pretending it wasn't happening. The elephant in the room, you know? And some people might have thought you were being strict, but I do get it. He didn't want cancer to define his life.
Mm. Hearing this now still brings up so many emotions. And honestly, frustration is the first thing that comes to mind, because this is 2020 you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And you say I was strict, but the truth is I was terrified. And this is why I feel frustration, because I felt like some people around me didn't understand my reactions at the time, and that was hard. Because when you're that scared, when you're in a unimaginable level of stress, you might come across as strict. And for me at least, that was my coping mechanism, I can say. Because what is a normal reaction to grief? I believe we are all so different in that matter. And that is important to talk about also. But for me, I was just trying to protect him at the time, and that was all I was trying to do.
I completely understand that. And as you say, there are no answer to what a normal reaction to grief is, I guess. And yeah.
No, it truly isn't.
But it was also so hard for those of us around him because that is my experience with this. Because we wanted to cry, we wanted to let him know how unfair this all seemed, but at the same time, we wanted to make things feel as normal for him as possible, even though we all knew that he understood exactly what was happening to him.
And I understand that too. And I guess we have to dive deeper into all the different ways to grieve along the way here, because this is my story and my reactions, and this will, of course, not be relatable to everyone. But yeah, back to it. First of all, we all knew that my husband wasn't an overly emotional person, at least not before this happened. And I know that it was easier for him when people didn't come over just to sit and cry with him or in front of him those last few weeks. Instead, I hoped people would get their tears out beforehand or after, and rather come and talk about life, funny stories and shared memories and so on, because he knew he was loved. There was no need for big, dramatic farewells. He knew.
I know, but it was so hard still to have to focus on not crying and showing your true feelings. But I guess it's not for us, but it's to make it easier for him, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But he did also have private conversations with some, saying his goodbyes in his own way. And I think that was easier for him if he was the one taking control over these conversations.
Yeah, and that must have been so hard for him and also for you to experience.
Yeah, but also I know how incredibly hard this must have been for you and for everyone around us. But at the time, that wasn't my priority, and my priority was him. And I knew his priority was us. He was thinking ahead and wanted to make sure we were going to be okay after he was gone, me and our boys.
That really shows how strong and loving he was, taking care of his family. That was so important to him.
It truly was. But at the same time, he also had to prioritize his own mental health, and that is important to acknowledge. But all this must have been so difficult and overwhelming for him, and it breaks my heart to think about it still.
That is all so much. I feel like I have to say, while we are talking about this, that I remember our last phone call and how that stuck with me. Him and my daughter had such a special bond, and in many ways, she was like the daughter he never had. They had the same sarcastic humor and loved to teach each other, and we were all laughing.
Yeah.
And she also loved to visit Holmen with you guys. That was your special place, and I tell people that it's my sister's island when referring to Holmen. And it really is, because it's your own little island with a small cottage and a boathouse. He loved that place, and so did she. It was so peaceful and secluded. On that last call, it was horrible. We all cried, because how do you even do that? How do you say goodbye forever? And I will never forget that moment. I mean, she was only 9 at the time, and maybe now, maybe if I'm thinking, was it too much for her? She does still remember it though, and we talked about it the other day, and she reminded me of the drawing she made for him and showed him on the phone.
I remember that now. And the drawing she made, he actually printed that one out in the hospital. But yeah, this is heartbreaking. She was 9, saying goodbye to her uncle on the phone over FaceTime. I think I almost blocked this out. It was too overwhelming. Because after this, I think he realized that he needed to protect himself in a way. This was so hard for him, and he was devastated after because he loved her and you all so much, and it was hard saying these goodbyes because then it probably feels more real, you know, that it's actually true. Life is about to end for him. And that is why he wanted things to feel as normal as possible in those last weeks. And this might be difficult for you to hear because this was such an important and precious moment for you all. And I get that. This also was so hard for him, and he couldn't continue to have all these farewells because that made it harder for him to die and leave us all behind. It just affected him too much.
That is so hard to hear, yeah. Because, of course, that wasn't the intention at all, but this was probably the call, like you said, that made him realize that it was just too much for him.
Yeah. But of course, that wasn't the intention. I totally get that. But this is also a part of the story, and I think therefore it's important to share.
Yeah, for sure. And when I think of it, of course, you can't have one-on-one farewell conversations with every single person. You know, that's going to be way too emotionally draining. You need that energy for other things, probably.
Yeah. And even I couldn't say all the things I wanted. I was strict with people, but I was also strict with myself. And at the time, I had to kind of turn off my own feelings in a way. But it was desperate times, and your whole life just evolves around him and trying to make his life doable, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, of course.
And it's kind of the same now also with my boyfriend. I tend to build up this inner frustration occasionally when I feel someone or something is unfair towards him. For example, when some doctors has the urge to reality orientation every single visit. That is just not necessary, I think, because we know already. Come on. But it's also different now in some ways. Of course, this is a new life and a new man, and he has his own way to deal with stuff. And he actually helps me to regulate myself by telling me if I'm being too much. And that I think is a good thing because we have that saying in Norway that he said to me once, and directly translated, "Don't cut my wings completely now." And of course, I will never, because it's important for him to be in control over the situation himself. Of course it is. It isn't always helpful when I act overprotective, and I know. So I feel like I, over the years, have learned to control my emotions more.
What do you mean by that, or how?
How? Well, before my whole body just reacted by going into this shaking and shivering mode before every doctor meeting. But now I'm more in control of this, and I guess that's both a good and a bad thing. I think I might come across as colder because I might seem so calm and collected under extreme situations, and even though my inside is still a mess, and I guess I can say that I have become this professional soldier. Yeah.
Again, that's totally understandable. And I wouldn't say that you have become much colder, but maybe more direct, that you say it as it is.
Yeah, maybe you can say that. I'm standing more up for myself and my needs, I guess.
Yeah. But now, back to what you said about your husband making sure you would be okay after he passed away. Because he made a list, didn't he?
He sure did, or we did together.
Yeah, I mean, of course, he had a list. He was so organized, and I wasn't really surprised when I heard about it. It included everything from finances to his own funeral, right? Again, how hard must that have been to write a list like that?
Yep, of course, he had to make a list, and this is one of the reasons I say I was strict with myself too is because it felt so absurd. I didn't really want to sit there with him and make a list about things to do after he wasn't there. And I tried to tell him, but I just couldn't get myself to. It was too important for him. And as you said, he was an organized person, and this was a thing that he could do.
Yeah.
So then he sat there in his chair telling me what to write, and there I was writing and crying at the same time. But yeah, we of course finished the to-do list for after his death that day, and I still have it.
That's so crazy. And that was also right before he passed away too, right? That must have been so hard for you and him.
Yeah, this was 2 days before. And it really was. But after he passed, this was truly such a blessing because he helped me to kind of start my new life. I had this list, and that made my practical decisions easier after he wasn't there anymore. So I didn't have to dwell on things.
That is really special. And that maybe felt like he was there helping you still in a way.
Yeah, it did. And I also saw that this was very helpful for him at the time. It made it easier for him to leave us, as I said. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that is actually so beautiful. He was making sure that he was taking care of you.
He was a beautiful man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I also remember that you were telling me about your inner rage after he passed away. How did this play out?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm normally a quite introvert person, polite and empathetic, and I normally never raise my voice if I don't really have to. I'm calm and collected. That's me, right? Confirm?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways we are the same in that way, except my voice does get very loud and my kids sometimes.
That is different. I, of course, did that too back in the days. But when it comes to my rage back then, I actually, after we talked about this and planned what to include in the podcast, I had a conversation also with my mother and sister-in-law, and they also clearly remembered the strictness and anger that consumed me back then. They even recalled moments that I had completely forgotten about. And this is kind of hard to look back on, I think.
Yeah, because that wasn't you at all in your normal state, was it?
No, it wasn't. And honestly, I believe the only real time you ever need to raise your voice and scream at someone is if it could actually save them, like stopping them from getting hit by a bus or something. Otherwise, you can communicate just fine using a normal voice and tone.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember being completely consumed by rage at one point. It was overwhelming. The memories are coming back to me now. And I remember after a few weeks walking the dog alone at night and almost wishing that someone would try to attack me, just so I could unleash all that anger and completely beat the crap out of them. I felt like a ticking time bomb. And thankfully, one day that rage just burned out. But I can still remember exactly how I felt, and honestly, thank God no one ever attacked me. That would be bad.
Yeah, thank God for them. No, but hearing this, I can totally understand. It makes sense. Of course, you were mad. You probably felt like you lost everything at that point. And I'm sure that's not a good feeling.
No, not at all. But I guess I'm not the only one that has had these feelings. We, of course, handle grief differently, and this is my story. But yeah, this is also a quite normal reaction to grief, I think.
For sure. And maybe a takeaway from this to those of you listening is that people in grief actually act out differently. They might seem angry, distant, silent, maybe even uninterested, cold. But I think all of this is normal reactions. And for us around, I think it's important to understand and just be there to support.
Yeah, And please understand, we are scared to death. We are in survival mode. This isn't, as you said, our normal selves. This is, I guess you can call it, emergency mode. And also, if any of you listening are healthcare professionals, this applies to you too. As a nurse myself, I've seen this from both sides. And again, we're not being difficult just for the sake of it. We are terrified. And I have so many stories, both my own and others, about being met the wrong way. I say this in caps because, of course, there are no exact conclusions to this, but, yeah.
I remember you telling me about the moment you found out how serious his diagnosis was, or that the cancer had spread, because he didn't want the full extent of it. He just wanted to focus on treatment and the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
But then you told me that a doctor had asked him if some students could join in on his visit, and in front of all of them, he just said it out loud. And I couldn't believe that he actually did that without thinking.
Yeah, and that's how I found out too. Because I actually left the room when they came in, and when I came back to his room after they left, he was pale as a sheet, completely in shock. And this was not how he wanted to find out. And actually, before I even left them all in there with him, I told the doctor that he should introduce them to each other, because it felt like they were just there staring at him like an object, not a person. So that wasn't a good feeling.
No, that's awful.
It was. But the story I remember the most, though, is of this one nurse in particular. She is still to this day the only one I remember by both first and surname, and she stuck with me, and not in a good way. My husband was rushed to the hospital with an infection, and this was between his treatments, and because of chemo, his veins were too fragile for a regular IV. So we therefore needed an anesthesia nurse or doctor to place it, as she couldn't. She called for them and told us to wait, and we waited and waited and waited. And when he started shaking, sweating from the fever, I rang the nurse again, asking if she could follow up. And I actually asked pretty nicely, in my opinion, but do you know what she said to me?
No.
Do I look like a magician to you? Do you think I could just make them magically show up?
God.
Then I kind of snapped, and do you really think that's the wish I'd make if you were a magician? And I was so angry.
Yeah, I bet you were. I would have been too.
This was not a good response from a professional. Okay, so I might come across as a nagging family member, and as a nurse, I know that there are more patients than us there. But this was not a good experience. And I know she couldn't stand me, because during the time he was admitted, I was almost always there, and of course she never said it outright, but I felt it every time she entered that room. And you can feel that vibe, kind of.
Totally. The energy.
Yeah. And I get that it's hard to deal with emotional family members. I've been on the nurse's side too, as I said, but you cannot bring your bad days or your insecurity into the patient's room. You have to be understanding, especially when we come across as difficult. But I must also say that most hospital staff were amazing. And yet it's the negative experiences that stick with you, right?
Yeah, I guess it's like that. But physically, how did all of this affect you?
Well, one thing is that I lost my appetite completely. And even today, I rarely feel hungry. I just eat because I know I should. But back then, I barely ate at all. I lost 22 pounds in just a few weeks. And at almost 5'11", I dropped to 125 pounds, and I was skin and bones.
Yeah, you really were. You were like a shadow of yourself. And I can't even imagine what it must have been like dealing with all of that at once. grief and stress and weight loss, but then you actually started losing your hair on top of that. And that is a side effect I've never heard of. And that must have felt like an extra punch when you were already down, in a way.
That too. I was like, really? As if I didn't have enough to deal with. But I just had to accept it. This all started when he first was diagnosed in 2014, and when he got his chemo and lost all of his hair, I started losing mine. And it was also absurd. And I was later diagnosed with alopecia, and my hair kept falling out and growing back in. And honestly, that was just another sorrow on top of everything else. It was like my body was physically showing the pain I was feeling inside, kind of.
And that must have been so tough. I never really thought about grief affecting the body in such extreme ways.
It really does. And at some point, I just had to let go of that part of the sorrow. Hair is just hair, right? It grows, it falls out, and at the end of the day, as long as we're healthy, that's what truly matters. But of course, it was a hit to my confidence at the time.
Yeah, I get that, having to deal with this on top of everything else.
Yep.
But then there was also running, something that really became a big part of your life. Was that more of a coping mechanism at first, you think? A way to escape from everything?
Actually, I started running the year before, but running now saved me. It gave me an outlet, and I remember those days of running up and down to the hospital during COVID, avoiding public transport because I couldn't risk getting sick. But more than that, running was the one thing that allowed me to breathe. Sometimes I just needed to go for a run just to be able to breathe, because breathing was hard those days. But while running, I had to. And it also emptied my head. It physically drained me, and in a way it helped me to feel more in control of something when everything else felt so completely out of control.
That makes so much sense. Having so much grief inside must be so heavy to carry in a way, and maybe with movement, getting the adrenaline going is something that really helps, getting it all out in a different way.
I guess whatever's giving you a timeout from grief will work, movement or not. But for me, the running and to physically tire my body was a lot of help. And running is still a part of my life today, not on that level, but it gives me so much more than 1 hour at the gym. The nature, the weather, the feeling of mastering something. It's not just about staying healthy, it's about clearing my mind, about making space for myself, and it's become my therapy in so many ways.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's such an important takeaway for anyone listening, to try and find something. I guess it doesn't have to be running, but maybe also journaling or painting or just getting outside for a walk. Whatever helps process your grief, I think, is so important.
Yeah, that is so true. You just have to find that thing or place or space that gives you peace of mind. So to you who might be going through something similar right now, I just want to say, whatever you're feeling, whatever way you're coping, be kind to yourself. You have all heard the message before every flight. Always remember to put your own mask of oxygen on first before helping others. And that counts for grievers also, I guess I could say. Because grief is messy, it's unpredictable, it's a raging storm within you, and it changes you forever. And therefore you need those small breaks in between the battles, and that's okay. And this is my experience with all of this.
That is such an important reminder, Nina. Thank you for sharing this with us. Your honesty, your strength, I know is going to resonate with so many people.
Well, thank you again for doing this podcast with me, asking me questions and giving me a space to talk about it.
And to all of you listening, thank you for being here with us. We hope this conversation brings comfort, understanding, or maybe even a little bit of healing.
And until next time, take care of yourselves.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nina had a dream, all black and white. We were talking in English, yeah, that ain't right. Two Norwegian sisters miles apart, but that dream lit a fire, put a mic to the heart. Katrine's in the States, Nina's back home. Two voices, one mission through the microphone. Grief and life, the highs and the lows. We hit record, uh-oh, where the file go? Oh, we fumble, we stumble, but baby we shine. Lost the intro, never mind. Wi-Fi shaky, cables crossed, but our hearts stay strong, no moment lost. From a dream to the mic, now the world can hear. Two sisters telling truths with a laugh and a tear. We live, we learn, we sip, we sigh. Talking love, talking lost, let the echoes fly. Grief walks in, pulls up a chair, says I'll stay a while, yeah, life ain't fair. But we mix it with laughter, a toast in hand, finding light where the dark still stands. Ba-da-da-boo-doo, is this thing on? Mic's on mute, oh well, move along. Ba-ba-dee, ba-ba-da, take two. Oops, too late, let's laugh it through. From a dream to the mic, now the world can hear. Two sisters telling truths with a laugh and a tear. We live, we learn, we sit, we sigh. Talking love, talking lost, let the echoes fly. So plug in, lean in, let's take our time. No script, no filters, just rhythm and rhyme. We're here, we're now, we're in our prime. Two sisters